I took my gold medal, thought I'd invented something. I said, man, I know I'm going to get my people freedom there. I'm the champion of the whole world, Olympic champion. I know I can eat downtown now. And I went downtown that day, had my big old medal on, and went to restaurants. So at that time, black things wasn't integrated. The black folks couldn't eat downtown. And I went downtown, I sat down, and I said, a cup of coffee, hot dog. The lady said, we don't serve Negroes. I was so mad. I said, I don't eat them either. Just give me a couple of hot dogs.
So it might not be a surprise that an early mentor of his was Malcolm X, then of the very controversial Nation of Islam.
Have you been advising him as far as his religious affiliations are concerned?
Well, no, I don't give advice to anyone.
Most people know that he changed his name based on his religious beliefs. But while most accounts say Cassius changed his name to Muhammad Ali, that's not the whole story. The morning after Cassius became heavyweight champ, he confirmed publicly that he was a member of the Nation of Islam. And he and Malcolm X announced his new name.
He said he was Cassius X.
But then Clay was a white man's name. It was a slave name.
Days later, Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, went further,
bestowing upon Cassius X an original name,
Muhammad Ali, which meant beloved of God.
So now, Muhammad Ali.
But he refused to change his name legally.
Who would have to face? The judge. The judge is what color?
I don't know.
He's white.
Probably.
So in other words, I'd have to ask a white man, may I call myself Muhammad Ali, boss?
He refused the draft to serve in Vietnam as a conscientious objector. That meant losing his title, losing his profession, and being convicted in a court.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor hungry people in the mud for big powerful America and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. What, I'm going to shoot them for what? How am I going to shoot them? I would just take me to jail.
But his moral stand brought him into the civil rights movement. He befriended Martin Luther King Jr. despite their religious differences.
What did you discuss back in the hotel room?
Nothing, just friends, just like Khrushchev and Kennedy.
United against oppression and the war.
As Muhammad Ali has just said, we are all victims of the same system of oppression. And even though we may have different religious beliefs, this does not at all bring about a difference in terms of our concern.
Still brothers.
Do you share the same concern that Muhammad has for his draft status?
Oh, I certainly do. My views on the draft are very clear. I'm against it.
And he took his case of conscientious objection to the Supreme Court.
I haven't burnt my own draft record. Or what I'm doing is legal. This is why I believe I'll receive justice in the higher court. You can deny the draft on any grounds, but you'll have to go to court. It's law. If you lose, you go to jail, which I said I do. My fight is legal.
Most people who objected to the Vietnam War avoided the draft however they could, burning their draft cards or using a complicated series of deferments like future President Bill Clinton did.
But if you notice, I'm been the most persecuted. I'm not allowed to work in America. I'm not allowed to leave America. Home of the brave, land of the free.
So are there times when you miss being heavyweight champ of the world?
No, they miss me.
I know that.
No, I don't miss it. I'm not missing it.
He won that case, and when he returned to boxing, he didn't stop shaking things up.
Viet Cong are not all bad, but America's still dropping bombs. In Hiroshima, Japan wasn't bad, but she still dropped the bomb. In Korea, they wasn't bad, but they still dropped the bomb. So now I'm going to forget the 400 years of lynching and killing and raping and depriving my people of freedom, justice, equality, the first fire, last high, the lowest of low, last respected. And I'm going to look at 2 or 3 white people who are trying to do right and don't see the other million trying to kill me.
He used these media appearances over and over to try to promote living a moral life.
As you know, in this country, a black athlete or entertainer has a lot of influence. Some of them promote wrestling, some of them make movies. I'd like to do all I can to uplift the people morally and spiritually, and as far as loving self and sticking together and helping self before expecting others to help them and respect them when they don't respect themselves.
Well, having known you as long as I do, I don't know anybody else who's better qualified to do that than you, and I know you mean it.
And in one of his final public appearances, he spoke out about Islam after the devastating attacks of September 11th, even though he could barely speak.
I'm a Muslim. I've been a Muslim for 20 years. And I'm against killing, violence, and all Muslims are against it. I think that people should know the real truth about Islam. You know me, I'm a boxer. I'm called the greatest of all time. People recognize me for being a boxer and a man of truth. And I wouldn't be here representing Islam if it was really like the terrorists made it look. I think that all the people should know the truth and come to recognize the truth, because Islam is peace against killing, murder, and the terrorists and the people doing that in the name of Islam are wrong. And if I had a chance, I'd do something about it.
And last fall, when he could no longer speak, he wrote a statement against comments from Donald Trump that lumped the actions of a few murderers in Paris and San Bernardino with 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. He said, quote, "Speaking as someone who has never been accused of political correctness, I believe that our political leaders should use their position to bring understanding about the religion of Islam and clarify that these misguided murderers have perverted people's views on what Islam really is." Ali was a fighter, but I don't think his muscles are really the part that we care about. And it's not what he cared most about either.
Boxing is just to introduce me to the struggle, but my main fight is for freedom and equality. And money don't really mean nothing, because I proved that when I gave up the title, not knowing if I'm coming back or not for 4 years.
So those gloves he wore represented a lot more than physical punching. And a pair of his have been in the president's private offices the past 8 years.
Tonight, Front Page Challenge welcomes the outspoken Negro leader, Malcolm X.
Sir, what's the real reason why you two men split? Is it merely ideological, or is it personality? What else?
Probably personality. It was not the statement that originally was given by the movement when we split. It's more personality than anything else.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Toms. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Black Muslims have sometimes, whether you have or not, and I think probably you have sometimes, it seemed to me, been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard speeches made by some of the people of your group. I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating what I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States, and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Just before Pierre takes it, you've got a pretty good fighter and the world's heavyweight champion lined up with you to help out. Yes, Pierre.
Well, Mr. X, if I guess I call you that, is that the proper appellation,
Yes.
Mr. X? I'm wondering if you still believe, as I think you certainly did at the time you were allied to the black Muslim movement, in a segregated black nation in North America.
I don't believe in any form of segregation or any form of racism. I'm against any form of segregation and against racism.
Am I right in saying that the black Muslim movement, which you have left, did believe in that?
Well, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers that the only solution was a separate state for black people.
And as long as I thought he genuinely believed that himself, I believed in him and believed in his solution. But when I began to doubt that he himself believed that that was feasible, and I saw no kind of action designed to bring it into existence or bring it about, then I turned in a different direction.
Are you still a Muslim yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people. But at the same time that I believe in this brotherhood, I don't believe in forcing my desire for brotherhood upon those who aren't willing to accept it.
Of course, I think the Christians would say that they also believed in brotherhood. What did you say to that?
I'd say they believe in it, but don't practice it.
Well, that'd be a pretty good answer.
Sir, when the muezzin goes up in the minaret twice a day, he cries to the world, there is but one God, and he is Allah. Do you deny that there is a Christian God?
The muezzin does this 5 times a day.
5 times, and I only heard him twice.
Well, you were fortunate to hear him twice. But he does this 5 times a day, and the same God that he says that he expresses the existence of is the God that the Christians profess to believe in themselves, and the God that the Jews believe in. One God, the creator of the universe. The Muslims believe in the God that created the universe, and I think the Christians do, and the Jews do. Now, as long as all of them are talking about the creator, the Jews may call him Jehovah, and Christians may have another name for him. Those who are Arabic speaking refer to him as Allah. Well, we believe in the same God.
Now, as the Muslim religion advances in the United States, are you modernizing it or sticking with the old faiths? For example, the complete segregation of the sexes.
I think that everything today on this earth is being modernized. Religious principles and practices, as well as political and other things.
Now, when you went to Mecca, this is a very sacred and forbidden city. I tried to get to Mecca myself and certainly didn't make it, not being a Muslim. But how would they accept you as one? You're an American. There are few American Muslims.
This is true, and by being an American and not having not being able to speak the Arabic language, I did strike a snag, a very serious snag. But I was fortunate to have been pretty well known by the officials in Arabia, and they knew too that I had accepted Orthodox Islam. It had been highly publicized in the paper, and I became a guest of the state. I was a guest of Prince Faisal, the present King Faisal, and they made it possible for me to go before the committee, Hajj committee or Hajj court, who examines you and asks you questions about your belief, and if you pass it, then you are okay to go to Mecca. But it's
you would
true.
have to have a translator then.
I had one. Then realizing that our problem in America, that we are black Americans, and we have a problem that goes beyond religion, we formed a group known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And the objective of this organization, it's non-religious, number one. Any Negro can belong to it. And the objective of that organization is to bring about a condition that will guarantee respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings. We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not a violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
Mr. X, may I thank you very much for coming on our program and perhaps clearing away some of the cobwebs of misconception that some of us might have had about your belief. And I think you're a very sincere man, and it takes a lot of courage to admit a former belief is wrong, and we congratulate you for that and the service you performed tonight in giving us your views. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
A one-of-a-kind manuscript written by a slave has now been preserved in the Library of Congress. The Arabic language autobiography spent decades in private collections before the library acquired it in 2017. Now it has been digitized for the world to read. And Amna Nawaz reports on the manuscript's remarkable journey for our ongoing Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Born and raised in West Africa, Omar ibn Said was 37 years old when he was kidnapped and taken to America as a slave in the 1800s.
Before I came to the Christian country, my religion was the religion of Muhammad.
His autobiography in his native language of Arabic is believed to be the only one of its kind, the original words of a Muslim American slave.
Then there came to our place a large army who killed many men and took me and brought me to the Great Sea.
His literacy and culture completely goes against, abolishes, one might say, annihilates the narrative that slaves were not capable of culture. In fact, they were persons with distinct histories, abilities, culture, and background.
Allah al-Rais has studied and translated the words of Omar ibn Said.
They sold me into the hands of the Christians, who bound me and sent me on board a great ship, and we sailed upon the Great Sea a month and a half, when we came to a place called Charleston.
He was wealthy, and he was highly educated, because in his autobiography he speaks about spending 25 years studying.
Mary Jane Deeb is the chief of the African and Middle East Division at the Library of Congress, where Ibn Said's manuscript now lives.
So there was a man who's caught at the age of 37, and shipped off to South Carolina, in a country he doesn't know, among people whose language he doesn't know.
Ibn Said wrote he was sold to a, quote, small, weak, and wicked man called Johnson. After years of abuse, he fled, but was caught in North Carolina.
He is then captured and brought to a jail cell, and he begins to write on the walls of his jail cell in Arabic. So that attracted attention of pretty important people, because the man who ends up buying him and releasing him from jail was the brother of the governor of North Carolina.
Over time, Ibn Said converted to Christianity. In his 60s, he wrote his own story, but only in Arabic.
It's written in Arabic, and so his masters could not really read it at all. They could not really influence its writing. And so it was really his exact words, unfiltered by the machinery of the editorship of masters and abolitionists, as other slave narratives were.
A machinery al-Rais says erased countless narratives, including the fact that up to 20% of Africans enslaved in America were Muslim. Ibn Said, in fact, chose to open his autobiography with a verse from the Quran.
The crux of this Quranic chapter is that it's only God who has the possession and the ownership, both of human beings and of things. And therefore, it seems to me a kind of a hidden text. What Omar is saying is that you guys have no right to own me here.
It's a narrative that challenges the original concept of who the slaves were when they came here. That they didn't really have a system of belief. They were uncultured. They didn't have a written system. This is what he brings to the table, and basically says that is who we really are.
But before those pages written by Omar ibn Said could be shared with the rest of the world, conservators here at the Library of Congress worked for months behind the scenes to bring those pages back to life.
We're trying to present the item as close to what it looked like at the time as possible.
Sylvia Albro led the effort to rescue the nearly 200-year-old manuscript. The materials themselves, she says, tell us even more about the life of Omar ibn Said.
It's actually surprising that the quality of paper for his manuscript is really pretty good. The fact that he had at his disposal good quality materials is an indication of the respect that he had as a figure, even as a slave.
That respect brought Ibn Said to the attention of prominent abolitionists, missionaries, and linguists at the time, who translated his story and used it in their fight against slavery. The entire manuscript is now available online for a new generation to read Ibn Said's words for themselves. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz in Washington, D.C.
And what a gift it is to all of us.
Can you tell me what is the history of Muslims in America?
There were Muslims on Columbus's ship and traveling with explorers all around the New World. Up to a third of all enslaved peoples were Muslim, and the White House was built by enslaved peoples. So it's reasonable to expect Muslims helped build the White House.
Did we have any relations with Muslim countries in those early days?
Have you heard of the United States Marine Corps song from the halls of Montezuma
to the shores of Tripoli?
That's
yes.
Well, Tripoli is in modern-day Libya, and the reason that's in the song is because we were allies with them. And as a thank you for helping them deal with piracy issues. The Marine Corps was gifted a sword, which has now become the saber of the Marine Corps dress uniform.
What? So many people don't know that.
And Thomas Jefferson was also hosting dinners at the end of Ramadan for Muslim diplomats in the White House.
Wow.
Jefferson once said that he knows the American experiment is a success when we can get a Muslim as a president.
I heard somewhere that the Statue of Liberty has some Muslim connection.
The designer based it on an Egyptian Muslim woman.
Oh my God, Lady Liberty totally has a Muslim face. And that kind of tracks because I feel like mine and her nose are very similar.
And we get town names like Allah, Arizona, and Muhammad, Illinois, named after the Prophet Muhammad. These towns were not predominantly Muslim. They got these names as a sign of respect Americans had for Muslim cultures, Muslim civilization, Muslim people.
Do they build any mosques up in these towns?
Two of the oldest we have are in Ross, North Dakota, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I would feel like that's the place you would say has the first Applebee's, not the first mosque.
We can look at the ways Muslims have inspired American architecture, but we can't forget the people like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, who were turning to Islam to recover their heritage that had been taken away from them, and to say that you can't claim that there's only one way to be American.
And what about today's Muslim influencers, or as I like to call them, Musfluencers?
I grew up in New York listening to a Tribe Called Quest, and when they dropped their new album, I was really excited. And they performed with Dave Chappelle on Saturday Night Live, and I think it was the first time that both the host and the musical guests of Saturday Night Live were all Muslims.
Dave Chappelle is a Muz.
He is.
So is Ice Cube.
DJ Khaled, French Montana.
Shaquille O'Neal.
In the Olympics, we had two American Muslim women, Ibtihaj Muhammad in fencing, and Delilah Muhammad, who won a gold in track and field.
The owner of Chobani is a Muz, and I eat one of those pumpkin Greek yogurts like every day.
And speaking of delicious food, the founder of Edible Arrangements is a Muslim as well.
Oh, hey, they look like flowers, but you eat them.
Muslims only represent about 1% of the American population.
How many of us are there?
About 3.5 million Muslims.
Here's a new stereotype about us. We are really bad at bowling, but really great at giving hugs.
You know the show The Simpsons?
Yeah.
Bart has a Muslim friend.
A Muslim is a great many things, depending on your perspective.
Muslim is the word we use to label people that follow the Islamic religion.
And believes in the oneness of God.
And that Muhammad is his messenger.
That's really all that it is. There's no secret handshake. You don't have to run through a gauntlet.
Things like not cheating, not stealing, not killing, not hurting folks are principal to the faith.
We can't eat pork. There's no pork on my fork, no swine on my mind.
A practicing Muslim prays 5 times a day.
I'm not jiggy with the piggy. I'm not aching for the bacon.
Every chapter in Quran except one starts with God is merciful, God is compassionate. Compassion, mercy. These were the two concepts.
I'm not hostage to the sausage. There's a lot of these phrases.
I think the question of what is a Muslim 100% cannot be answered. We're talking about over 1 billion people.
People think a Muslim is traditionally basically someone looks like me with a beard, maybe not as much swag because that's unique to me, but Muslims come from all different walks of life.
A Muslim is anyone who says he's a Muslim.
There's all levels of Muslims.
That includes, the secular Muslim who eats BLTs and washes it down with a glass of Pinot.
There are some that are very devout and practicing, and there are some that are not, just like with every other faith.
Nobody in Islam gets to say who is and who is not a Muslim.
God is the one who determines that.
We don't have a Muslim pope, although it'd be cool if we did, and I think it should be me.
If you really want to break down the Arabic word, it literally means the one who submits.
To God. To peace.
I knew theoretically you could be a white Muslim, but where I grew up, I've never seen a white Muslim person.
Yeah. You survived overnight?
I did. I got like 3 hours of sleep. I think that's a successful on call.
I think so.
That's pretty light. Thank you, sir.
My grandparents on both sides of my family were farmers in rural Mississippi.
Black-eyed peas and cornbread, you can't get much lower than that.
I definitely went through a lot of phases of being unaware of injustice and then seeing injustice, but not knowing how to process that.
I'm probably the only person here whose grandfather taught them how to tie a noose.
Guide us, O God, on the straight path. the path of those who are not lost along the way. We ask you to be with us as we go out on the floor today and serve your people. In chaplaincy, you get some really, really life or death situations. We get people flown in from all over the state who have been in car wrecks, they've been shot. Any trauma that comes in, the chaplain has to go to with all the doctors. Going into patient rooms, when I kind of found out I'm not the Muslim chaplain that sees Muslims, I'm the chaplain. I'm scared these people are going to kick me out of the room. Hey, I'm Shane from the chaplain's office. It helps, I think, being a Muslim that walks in with a Southern accent and can talk about deer hunting and getting in a tree stand. I kind of got pretty secure in that before all the Trump stuff started happening. I started hearing Malcolm X mentioned in some of this music, so I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Right after I became Muslim, I walked around Jackson, Mississippi in a robe and a turban. It wasn't out of love for the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to try to emulate him. It was to piss my family off. Southern hospitality and Islamic generosity, they blend perfectly. The Andy Griffith Show, that's a good example of everything I aspire to be as a Muslim. Just look at the Andy Griffith Show. Like hard work and believing in God and honoring your family. And people that are rednecks, redneck doesn't mean something negative. That's a badge of honor. So I made a group called the Society of Islamic Rednecks. And I was thinking, how can I share Islam with people from my background? 1,600 people joined this group on Facebook. And it's just funny. We're working on the Islamic commentary to Leonard Skinner, Simple Man, like 61 people. But Halal Barbecue, 5,014. On the little blurb, it says there's many positive parts of redneck culture, but we just seek to purify that of racism and sexism. I was very concerned about how people of color would respond to that, but the criticism I've got has been from white people. I still have mixed emotions about it. Hey, assalamu alaikum, how are you? Shane, nice to see you.
And so I've asked different people of color that are scholars what they think about that.
Good to see you too. Hey, assalamu alaikum.
And it's an important conversation to have.
Yeah.
This narrative of reconciling whiteness, trying to purge whiteness of some of the more pernicious parts, and being Muslim, is common across the spectrum of white folks, from Southern white folks to Northeastern white folks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but see, the thing about being white, as I'm sure you know better than I do, anything you do that connotes even slightly some exclusivity is, you know.
Well, that's why I was thinking to transition from like the Islamic redneck to Southern hospitality.
Okay.
To open it up, like working on like Southern Hospitality Islamic Center.
I gotta take a picture of the shit. My wife's gonna love this.
Brothers have retained more of the humanity than. But I thought.
Being white, you have the luxury, you can kind of pretend racism doesn't exist.
But I think in our souls, we know something's not right and we're not at ease.
So our brother Shane is going to tell you something. He told me, he said, you know, Imam, I grew up as a redneck. He's in the African American Islamic Summit. That's Deen. That's Islam.
It's impossible from where I sit to be raised in America and not be socialized to be a racist. Or white supremacy is socialized into you as a white person here. Allah made us this way, and if we've participated in something that's unjust, we need to turn back to Allah, make tawbah, apologize, and then stand up for what's right. And what part of your culture do you keep, and what parts of your culture do you purify and you let go of, such as racism and sexism?
Most of my family are from North Carolina. Honestly, we hate to use these harsh words like hate and all these things, but you're the guy that I hate. So to hear you say that, you know, to apologize, to validate things, it unlocks the door for us too to come out of a shell. Let me see your hand like this. Well, you gotta integrate it with mine like this. You know, if we get on the same side of the fight, yeah, I mean, divided will fall. Divided will fall.
It's like we already have that issue of division to begin with, right? No offense, you know, but like, how would you get your people to let go? Because white supremacy or the system benefits you, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So then who's going to let go of that? Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's my question that I want to explore. Like,
Yeah.
how do you do that? We can make a contribution to standing up for justice. Someone was asking me about this, well, what would motivate white people to do that? Because you don't really have anything to gain. You're just going to give away your privilege, but I'm thinking you gain your humanity by doing that. You're true to your soul, that you don't brutalize other human beings.
Inside America's Islamic community, one of the fastest growing populations is Latino. And the epicenter of that movement is here in Houston, Texas, home to not only one of the largest Latino communities, but also one of America's largest Muslim communities. Just 350 miles away from the Mexican-American border during one of the worst deportation crises in recent history, and less than a year from the Muslim ban.
We gotta go and we gotta knock the shit out of these people.
I've come here to meet Jaime. Jaime?
Yeah, I'm Lee.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, man.
The founder of America's first Islam and Spanish Center, to find out why two of America's most discriminated groups are actually coming together.
Whenever people come in, we let them know that, look, it's not a traditional mosque. We're the only producers in the world producing material in the Spanish language and distributing it, you know, at the mass level.
People who come through the center, do they come here thinking in the ways that the media has portrayed Muslims?
Most definitely.
Or believing the things that the media has portrayed about Muslims?
Most definite. In fact, that's the default. When people come in here, before coming in here, we know they have preconceived notions. You know, if I didn't know Chinese people, and on the media it says Chinese people kill people who are not Chinese, I wouldn't want a Chinese neighbor.
Right.
You know, it's just common sense. That's the reason why we built this place.
Yeah.
Getting rid of some of these misconceptions. Then they start thinking, you know, why don't I know this stuff?
While Latinos are the fastest growing population within Islam, very little research has gone into discovering why. So I'm heading to Rice University to meet with Professor Considine, a religious studies expert, to gain clarity on why so many Latinos are becoming Muslim during such a critical and divisive time in America. Why is it that Latinos are seeking out Islam? Does it have anything to do with the common experience between Muslims and Latinos in this country?
Absolutely. Especially after the election in 2016, where a lot of these people felt purged.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
A lot of Latinos are recognizing that not being white in this country comes with certain barriers. Latinos might also be thinking, Muslims generally speaking, they face similar obstacles with all the racism and the xenophobia happening from the top of the government.
This is a 5-year ban.
To an everyday existence on the street.
Who knows what they're gonna bring into this country? We're gonna bombs, ISIS, what? They need to go.
I think a lot of people are seeing Islam and the Islamic tradition in general as being more tolerant of race. People have to recognize, you know, one of the most racially diverse religions in the world is Islam.
We stand in opposition to their opposition. Allah.
How large is this movement?
The statistics suggest that it's got to be at least 250,000 Latin Muslims in this country.
Today is the Muslim holiday of Eid, and for a number of the members of the Islam and Spanish Center, this is going to be their first major Islamic holiday. So we're going to go inside and meet some of the members of this community and find out what this transition has been like. Did you guys have any misconceptions about Islam or about Muslims before you became Muslim?
Terrorists.
Yes.
Terrorists. My family makes jokes. My brothers mostly. They're like, oh, you're going to the masjid. Oh, they're teaching you to make bombs or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Terrorism is not from Islam. These types of acts are not, from this religion.
From what I knew before when I became a Muslim to now, yeah, it's totally different.
How has Islam impacted your cultural identity?
And on April 30th, 7/11, Muslim General Tariq ibn Ziyad landed in Gibraltar. By the end of his campaign, most of the peninsula was brought under Islamic rule. Islam has been present in Hispania since the Umayyad conquest in the 8th century. As in other places of the Caliphate, many others embraced Islam. It is not known for sure the exact number of people who were Muslims, but by 1100, the Muslim population in the Iberian Peninsula was estimated to 5.5 million. They were Arabs, Berbers, or local people who accepted the religion. Even if the Umayyad dynasty collapsed, parts of the peninsula were held by Muslim dynasties in the next centuries, and the Muslim majority existed more in the Spanish part than in the Portuguese part of land. In the next few centuries, Christians pushed from the north and started Reconquista. Due to this process, the Muslim population started to decline. At the end of the 15th century, the Reconquista culminated in the fall of Granada, with the Muslim population of Spain estimated to be around 500,000. Approximately half of the Muslims lived in the former Emirate of Granada, the last independent Muslim state in Spain, which had been annexed by the Crown of Castile. Muslims living under Christian rule were known as Mudahars. The conquest was accompanied by the Treaty of Granada, signed by Emir Muhammad XII of Granada, allowing the Spanish crown's new Muslim subjects a large measure of religious toleration. The subjects were allowed the continuing use of their own language, religion, schools, and laws. However, in 1492 started the monarchy's reversal of freedoms. It started with the Alhambra Decree, ordering the expulsion of practicing Jews from the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon and its territories. This continued when the Archbishop Talavera was replaced by the Cardinal Cisneros. He immediately organized a drive for mass forced conversions to Christianity. Also, thousands of Arabic books were burned. At the end of the 15th century, in 1499, the Mudahars rebelled. The first rebellion of the Alpujarras was unsuccessful and only had the effect of giving King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella a pretext to revoke the promise of toleration. That same year, the Muslim leaders of Granada were ordered to hand over almost all of the remaining books in Arabic, most of which were burned, sparing only the medical manuscripts. Beginning in the city of Valencia in 1502, Muslims were offered the choice of baptism or exile. Many of them chose the first option because exile was difficult. Thus, the majority are forced to accept conversion. They became the new Christians, also called Moriscos. Many of them continued to practice their old beliefs in private. In 1567, King Philip II made the use of the Arabic language illegal and forbade the Islamic religion, dress, and customs, a step which led to the second rebellion of the Alpujarras. Acts of brutality existed afterwards. Edicts of expulsion for the expulsion of the Moriscos were finally issued by Philip III in against the remaining Muslims in Spain. Other expulsions were also made. The last mass prosecution against Moriscos for practicing Islam without being seen occurred in Granada in 1727. By this period, the indigenous Islam is considered to have been effectively extinguished in Spain.
I'm still Puerto Rican, from when I wake up till I go to sleep.
Something similar happened.
We still have our culture, we still have our language and everything. So.
I'm still Mexican. I still like the same food. I still eat all of y'all food. And I just, my faith has changed.
When I became Muslim, I was given a set of principles. Do this, don't do that. When in doubt, don't.
That's Jesse Burleson, who people here know as Hassani. He's been in prison for 31 years. Hassani is one of the practicing Muslims at Solano Prison, and they're part of the millions of people behind bars in the US. In fact, the United States has the largest prison population in the world. The more than 2.3 million people it had incarcerated by the end of 2017 were more than any other developed nation. That number includes inmates at federal, state, and county prisons, and it's growing. In a place where your housing, meals, and recreation time is highly constrained by rules, finding a way to practice your faith can be difficult. These inmates have figured out a way to infuse their faith into their sentences.
One of the things that started me seeking something different was I was looking at the people that were around me who were older than I was, who had been in prison longer than me, and who had been on that same negative, self-destructive path, and me not being satisfied with what I was seeing in them. And at that time, I started going to religious services. It didn't matter if it was Muslim, Christian, Jewish. I went seeking a better way, and I believed in God, so I know that the only way I was going to change was through God.
He's just one of the Muslims that Solano chaplain Muhammad Ali interacts with on a daily basis. Ali is an imam who spent 4 years at this prison, helping people like Hassani explore their faith. He believes it can be an important part of their rehabilitation.
Religion is important to inmates because it connects them to something bigger than their circumstance. You have people who are here in prison, and there's a lot of things you can't control, whether it's your eating, whether it's your living condition. It really helps human beings feel a sense of connectedness to something beyond what's right in front of them.
But Islam's journey in penitentiaries has been complicated by prison culture and legal challenges. Though nationally, Muslims make up 1% of the US population, that number is expected to double by 2050. Some of that growth specifically comes from inmates converting to Islam behind bars. Islam's known for having a particularly strong presence in prisons. In fact, more people convert to Islam per capita than any other religion. Nationwide, Muslims make up 10 to 15% of prisoners. Ali even said he has 1 to 2 inmates convert to Islam monthly, though that's not his goal. What makes those statistics resonate more is knowing how difficult it was to get Islam accepted as a recognized religion within some prisons.
Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is injury or pardon, Lord. And where there's doubt, true faith in you.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. I testify that there is no God except Allah, and I testify that Muhammad is his servant and his messenger. I announce that I have embraced Islam, I have accepted Islam as my religion with my free will. I will continue to respect all other religions, including Christianity, but my way of life, my religion is Islam. Alhamdulillah, congratulations sister, congratulations.
flummoxed and flabbergasted by the events of the last 2 weeks. Wheaton College will never induce me to kowtow to their doublespeak concerning the statement of faith, so as to appease an imaginary constituency that clearly knows little about what academic freedom or Christian love mean. All humans, Muslims, the vulnerable, the oppressed of any ilk, are all my sisters and brothers, and I am called by Jesus to walk with them in their oppression. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom, peace, and grace. I bring you greetings from Charlottesville, Virginia, where white supremacists, racists, anti-Semites chanted blood and soil, a Nazi slogan, while marching around a statue of the most famous plagiarist of John Locke, Thomas Jefferson. The Jefferson who claimed radical equality was for all, but sat atop Sally's body as well as Monticello's hill, in both cases depriving bodies and souls of dignity. And the so-called alt-right martyred Heather Heyer. White supremacists don't wear white hoods anymore. They're mainstreamed. They wear khakis and white polos, and they are in the White House. But we, Muslims, Christians, Jews, people of no faith, but part of a multi-faith movement, were made for America's shit. I bring you greetings from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where I grew up under the tutelage of my grandfather at New Bethel Baptist Church, a church on the black side of town because redlining is part of America's history of carving out plantations and reservations. I bring you greetings from that church where not 2 summers ago, Coonville, I hope you don't know that term, but if you don't, you should look it up. It's a reference to our history of racism and Jim Crowism, and it was sprayed on the side of the church that my grandfather built with his retirement money because he felt God, Allah, was calling him to build a church in this underserved side of town. I bring you greetings from that place because it is part of the heritage that led me to Chicago, Illinois, where after studying for my PhD in race, religion, and politics, I went to Wheaton College. So I bring you greetings from Chicago, where at Wheaton College, I was the first black female tenured in the history of this stop on the Underground Railroad, founded in 1860. Often called the evangelical Harvard, and where, when I declared my intention in a viral Facebook post to don a hijab, maybe you recognize me now, in solidarity with Muslim women, instead of the act being seen as the act of Advent solidarity, it's a Christian time of celebration of the incarnation of Jesus Christ, as we believe. My intention to show my religious devotion during a high holy Christian season in solidarity with my Muslim sisters in the wake of San Bernardino and Jerry Falwell Jr., a Christian at Liberty University, saying from the perch of his chapel pulpit, if people had in their back pocket what he had in his, they could end those Muslims before they end us. To Christians inciting violence in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. So the college and I parted ways, lawyers know what that means, because I had the temerity to say that Muslims My brothers and sisters and I worship the same God, not to mention our Jewish brothers and sisters, but they didn't have a problem with that part.
I'm at the airport. It went pretty okay. I only got patted down extra a little bit.
Speeding.
I feel like it's an American thing that if you see a woman with hijab, it's like a symbol of oppression.
I feel like it takes away from just you as a female being able to express.
A man tells you like you have to do this and then you do it.
I feel like in some cultures they don't have a choice. My name is Adina Lekovich and I'm the Director of Policy and Programming at an organization called the Muslim Public Affairs Council. The Quran, which is our holy book, it revealed the idea that women should cover their hair and their outward beauty, except for what they would normally leave uncovered. The vast majority of Muslim women who do cover do it in either the way that I'm wearing it, or more commonly, where just their face is showing, and their neck is covered, and then they wear regular clothing. But the core idea is that it's supposed to be a symbol of modesty and a symbol of a woman's intellectual ability over her physical beauty and sexuality.
What I'm more nervous about is like leaving this safe space of the office and like going out, especially like of all places to Hollywood.
I think it's just something that's like a very obvious statement of who you are.
Perhaps if I come across another woman wearing a hijab and she looks at me like, is she really a Muslim?
The first day I put my scarf on, I was walking in Westwood and an old lady walked towards me and she looked at me like she knew me, and I'm thinking, where do I know her from? Where do I know her from? And she comes up to me and puts her hand on my shoulder and she says, honey, you're in America now. You don't have to wear that here. All right, so now it's time to learn how to put on a scarf or a hijab, as they're called. So step one, if you can pull your hair back either into a low bun or some way that's going to keep your bangs from flying forward. Throw it over your head. Make sure that about a quarter of it is hanging down on one side. Cover as much of your hair as possible. And then take the long side and pull it under your chin, kind of tightly wrapped up and over your head. And then you'll take the end and just tuck it in wherever it feels comfortable. You are going to want to try to cover any exposed skin around your neck and shoulders and chest. And that's on a minute by minute basis. That's the maintenance that you want to look out for during the day. But otherwise, you're all set.
So we just got back from lunch and there was one guy that was kind of like intensely staring at us, but I mean, for the most part, no one did anything outrageous.
I'm on the way to the airport now. I totally forgot that I was actually going to New York tonight.
The guy sitting next to me, as an opening sentence, said, "Are you Arabic?"
About to go to dinner wearing this. I'm a little nervous to see what people will say.
I felt like the need to be weirdly smiley and weirdly nice.
I didn't really think that many people were looking at me, but then I asked Chris and my mom, and they felt like everyone was kind of looking at us.
Got the recognition from another woman in a hijab who recognized and smiled back at me, like saying, "Okay, sister, we're on the same mission."
We had this kind of female connection, It was very sweet, and I'll never forget, the way she looked at me was like she was acknowledging me and I was acknowledging her.
When you wear a hijab, it kind of does all the talking for you. It makes the first impression for you. And so I think if people have negative connotations about women who wear hijab, then it's hard to kind of counterbalance that.
Just walking around, people would just stare at you, and it felt weird. But I feel like I've definitely done that before.
I just got kind of used to having the hijab on my head and I forgot that it was there. So when I would see these people intensely looking at me, it was like, why are they looking at me? And I'm like, oh, because I have this on my head.
The most surprising thing was when I wore it around my friends, they didn't react to it.
As a woman, you should be able to wear whatever you want, and if that's what you want to wear, then that's what you should wear.
I like the things that it represents. If those things are being humble and being intellectual and being equal.
The Supreme Court ruled against Abercrombie & Fitch in a religious discrimination case. In the 8-1 ruling, justices say Samantha Eloff, a Muslim woman who was denied a job at the retailer for wearing a hijab, can raise discrimination claims without proving the company intentionally avoided hiring her because she wore a headscarf for religious reasons.
It's a big win for the First Amendment. I think a lot of people would say it's a big win for religious freedom. And it might make life a little bit more difficult for employers who are looking to hire and not do so in a discriminatory way.
Justice Scalia wrote the majority decision. The court's sole dissent, Justice Thomas, wrote, Abercrombie's dress code was a neutral policy not intended to discriminate on religion and therefore was lawful.
He really sort of agreed with the lower court. The lower court said, no, you've got to require that a company know that a person is wearing a headscarf or behaving in a certain way because of his or her religion.
Since being rejected by Abercrombie, Miss Eloff has worked at other retailers like Old Navy and Forever 21. She is currently a merchandising manager at Urban Outfitters.
Where it says the raising of children. The raising of children is difficult, such that they require both patience and tactfulness. My name is Delia Chandler. I was born and raised a Christian, and I converted to Islam about 5 years ago. I'm the only one in my family that is Muslim, so everyone else is Christian. Growing up in the Midwest, saw and experienced a lot of racism, a lot of the divide. I grew up watching Klan rallies with the cross burnings and everything in the courtyards or in front of the courthouse. There's no way that you can talk about the U.S. and not reference Islam, even though they try to hide it. And it's not just for the Arabs or the Middle Eastern. You know, Islam has a lot of different faces and a lot of different cultures mixed in it because it's for everyone. It was brought to the humanity. Such that they require both patience and tactfulness. Subsequently, some children need to be treated with
Al-Islam in the Americas goes back to at least 1500s. Some would say 1400s. And what we look at, we see the foundation of African Muslims here in the U.S., Caribbean, Central and South America. The foundation remains with us and you can't escape it. It's right here. It's the fabric of our society. For our ancestors who came here and who were Muslims, it was difficult and it was hard, but they still faced the battle with regards to practicing Al-Islam. They can go and do fasting, they can do charity, they can do making salat, they can acknowledge the oneness of the Most High.
I'm Nia Malika Dixon. I'm originally from Baltimore, and I'm an independent filmmaker. I run my own production company, Audace Entertainment, to center the narrative of Black Muslim women and girls.
Being a Black Muslim in Baltimore was normal. That was just life. I didn't know anything other than that. I grew up in a very tightly knit community. Ours was one of the first masjids established by Warthi Muhammad. I grew up in that masjid. Went to school there. It's called Sister Clara Muhammad School, named after his mother. It was there that I met Muhammad Ali. It was there that I grew up a Black girl. I didn't think it was strange to be Muslim. I was just what we were. Growing up in Baltimore, I originally grew up in a predominantly Black community until we moved to the county, and my mother began teaching at an Islamic center that was predominantly Arab, predominantly Desi, and it was difficult for my younger brothers and sisters and for me with darker skin because we were marginalized. Often I would get side-eye instead of wa alaikum salam. I was often made to feel like your scarf is not right because we pinned our scarf in the back and draped it in the front. Nobody wants to be outcast. Nobody wants to be, that is not a good feeling. And so some of the girls that I talk to, they lighten their skin. They adopt, on the other opposite end of the spectrum, dark-skinned girls, they adopt these behaviors that will make them more acceptable in communities, wear their scarves a certain way to be more like Arabs or to be more like Desis. Or I had one sister, she's dark-skinned, and she said, you know, my mom had us wear shalwar kameez growing up. And I don't know what to say to that because that's not Black culture. That's another person's culture. And the erasure of your own Black culture, it's harmful and it's hurtful. One Arab guy told me, the Black Muslim community tends to be troubling, like they're troublemakers. But you know what, it's not us that's making the trouble. Because we're Black, the trouble comes to us. Black Muslim communities usually are dealing with the issues of being Black, more so than anything. We're not usually called terrorists because when you first see me, you see me as Black. But like we were going back about the masjid, the school where I taught, where it was mostly Arabs and Desis, there is, in my opinion, what I believe is that they don't want to be singled out. And so because Black people are singled out, like that's our legacy here in this country. I feel othered in those spaces. And it's not a good feeling when your own community makes you feel like you don't belong. That's hurtful. I was heartbroken. So, you know, my decision to find my tribe, people who look and live like me, was a way to heal my broken heart and and get back in the trenches and build those bridges, because I'm never going to give up on that. I'm getting so emotional. I'm sorry. Part of the reason why I created the hashtag was to show people that you can't separate them. I'm black, I'm Muslim, I'm a woman, and I'm fly, you know? That's who I am. It's one identity.
During slavery, we were just slaves. We had no identity. We were deaf, dumb, and blind. So in the Nation of Islam, we became proud of ourselves.
My name is Issa Mubarak. I'm an African American, Mexican, Muslim. I grew up in the South Central LA area the first 18 years of my life. I am Muslim, but sometimes I feel as though basketball is almost my second religion. You know, it's a part of me, a part of who I am now.
My name is Abdurazak Abdullah. I'm 17 years old. I'm a black Muslim and I live in Los Angeles. Recently I finished high school. Come this fall, I should be starting community college.
Being black and Muslim is mostly complicated because of, you know, trying to fit in. You're trying to fit into a country where they don't really accept black people or Muslims like that.
Like
and
most
now,
of the Muslims you see are like, they would probably be like Arab. They don't really expect black people to be Muslims or something. They expect them like Arab or Middle Eastern people.
when you have a country that just voted in a president that doesn't like black people, Mexicans, or Muslims, it gets a little harder because we just got to the point where we're like, you know, breaking grounds with people like, you know, Muslims are okay, black people are okay, and then now this president comes in saying both of them are not. We actually are. I mean, it gets a lot more difficult. I was walking down the street going home. I saw police pull up on the side of me driving slow, and I didn't think anything much of it because, you know, normally they pull up and they look at us anyways, right? So I just assumed, you know, he's just checking me out, see what I'm doing. So I'm just like, oh, like, how you doing, officer? I keep walking, and then he pulls right up to me, and another one pulls up on the sidewalk with me, and he's like, they're like, oh, get on the floor, like, you know, put your stuff down, get your stuff on the floor. I'm like, what did I do? I'm like, I hope I don't get shot, so I put my hands up, put my backpack down, and I'm like, what did I do? Like I did nothing wrong. I know I'm good. Like, and then he's like, I'm gonna let you know in a minute. I'm gonna let you know in a minute. I was like, all right, fine, I'm gonna comply. I comply, I put my stuff down. He told me, put your hands behind your back. And I'm like, damn, what did I do? He still didn't tell me, bro. And then he finally puts cuffs on me. Why are you detaining me? He's like, we'll tell you later. I'm like, but you need to tell me now. Like, you can't just pull me over and tell me like to get out and stop and do all that for nothing.
My everyday concern, it's not more so Islamophobia, because they don't really, when they look at me, they don't really assume I'm a Muslim. So, you know, it's more so the being black and, you know, just being a black man, they instantly assume you're doing the worst, you know, the cops, and then...
Maybe when they find out what your name is.
Yeah, when they find out your name is, they're like, oh, he black like, and Muslim.
What? And you live on a block where there's a masjid with a lot of Muslims? That's a little suspect, sir. I've got that from a cop too.
When I get pulled over and like they are like trying to pat me down, they ask me like, oh, you got any guns, grenades, you know, rocket launcher, any that on you? I'm like, what? How is that gonna be in my pocket?
9/11 made it a lot worse. Like way more difficult for Muslims to even get a job out here. Like you put your name on a job application. I put my name, Issa Mubarak. You think they're gonna call me back? Bro, they're probably looking at it. Next, I have to call them. I'm like, yeah, I'm Issa Mubarak, and they're like, really? Like,
okay, you gotta sound like a regular person.
Okay, so let's begin. We got a lot to talk about in this episode. When we first look at Christianity, Christianity consists of people who believe in the deity Jesus Christ. Christians, generally speaking, believe Christ is the Son of God and walked on earth as the incarnate form of God, the Father. So in other words, they believe that Jesus was God in the flesh. Islam is made up of individuals who believe in the deity Allah, which is just the Arabic word for God. They believe that Allah's teachings were recorded word for word by God's last prophet named Muhammad. Currently, Islam is the second largest religion in the entire world after Christianity, and based on the latest estimates, the current global population of Christianity sits at 2.3 billion followers, which is 31% of the total population of the world. Islam follows behind at 1.8 billion followers, which works out to be approximately 24% of the entire global population. So as you can see, these two religions, of course, have played a huge role in shaping what we know to be human history. Because look at this. This is half of the population here fall in between these two religions. Now, when we look at when these two religions were formed as organized religions, Islam takes us back to 610 to 622 CE. Christianity, on the other hand, was established as an organized religion in 28 to 33 CE, which was centuries before Islam. So we hear the terms Christian, Christianity, and all of that. So what does Christian actually mean? If someone calls himself a Christian, what are they saying? Well, Christian simply means a believer in Christianity, which is someone that follows the teachings of Christ. Very simple. Now, Islam means submission to the will of God. And those who submit to the will of God are called Muslims. When it comes to the place of worship, where do Christians go to worship? Well, of course, we know of churches. There's also chapels, cathedrals, basilicas, as well as Christians are allowed to worship in homes and any other living spaces. Muslims worship at mosques, aka masjids, and any other place considered clean by Islamic standards. So it's pretty open. There's not necessarily a specific place that you have to go to worship. Both of these religions are pretty open. One of the main differences between these religions is the doctrine of the Trinity. The Trinity, or the Godhead, is one of the core beliefs of Christianity, and it states that there is one God who has three manifestations: the Father, the Son, as well as the Holy Spirit. And I kind of like to use this example. It's not really the best, but you got to think of it like a corporation who has three founders, and all of the three founders have different roles, but under the same umbrella corporation. So in this case, it would be like God Corporation, and then we have Father, Son, Holy Spirit, which is kind of equally all God. That's kind of how I try to wrap my brain around it, and hopefully that made sense for you. But Muslims, however, believe that they are the ones that practice true monotheism, which means that they do not accept the doctrine of the Trinity, because how can three be one? And the core belief of Islam is that there is no God worthy of worship but Allah. And it's a simple concept. There's just Allah. That's it. When it comes to the differences between the scriptures in Christianity and Islam, the holy book in Christianity, of course, is the Bible, and it's said to be the inspired word of God. This means different things to different people, but pretty much it means that Christians believe that the books of the Bible are written by many people over a span of 1500 years, and those people were guided by the Spirit of God through divine inspiration. And these writings came through various different forms. You know, in the Bible there's songs, there's poetries, there's stories, there's genealogies, and in these writings we see personal expressions of human beings working side by side with God. Now, when we look at the holy book of Islam, the Quran, it is said to be the word of God, and it was dictated to Muhammad, and it was written down word for word without any sort of personal expression or any other humanness, if you will, added to the writings. The most true reading of the Quran has to be in its original Arabic language, because translating it into other languages can also take away from the interpretation of the Quran. So that's where a lot of times we get a little bit of confusion when it comes to the scriptures of the Quran. People are like, no, but in the original Arabic it means this, but if you translate it in English or another language, there's not necessarily a direct translation, so some of the context may be lost. So that's what they say, if you want to get the most out of reading the Quran, learn some Arabic, or at least find somebody that knows Arabic and is very versed in the Quran to help you out. Next difference I'm looking at is the difference in the prophets. So in the Quran, the prophet Abraham was known as the beloved servant of God, and because of Abraham's devotion to God, God made many of Abraham's descendants prophets. Now, the story of the prophet Abraham being commanded to sacrifice his own son, Isaac, is known in both Christianity and Islam. In Islam, that son, however, who God told Abraham to sacrifice is Ishmael, and it was through his lineage that Islam was established through the prophet Muhammad. In Christianity, the son that Abraham was told to sacrifice was his son Isaac, and through the line of Isaac comes many prophets like Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, King Solomon, and of course, Jesus Christ. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the differences in the beliefs of Jesus Christ in both of their religions. In Islam, Muslims accept that Jesus of Nazareth did in fact exist and that he was born of the Virgin Mary. But Islam also believes that Jesus was simply another prophet equal to other prophets before him. Muslims believe that Muhammad is the final messenger and is superior to all other previous prophets that came before him. In the Christian faith, they believe that Jesus is the Son of God, which makes him equal to God. And before he came to earth as a man, he was accepted as the second person of the Trinity. And another title that Jesus is given in Christianity before he came to live on the earth as a man is the Word of God. And then the Word of God came down to live on earth in human flesh. Islam doesn't believe in the idea that Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross. They believe that God spared him from that. In the Christian faith, God sacrificing his son Jesus on the cross is actually the focal point of the faith, because without that, the world would remain hopeless, just doomed, humanity done. So that leads me to the next difference I want to highlight. What are the differences between the ideas of salvation in both of these religions? Well, Islam teaches that salvation is based on working to achieve it. So how it works is like this. A Muslim must keep the 5 pillars of Islam. They have to confess a Shahada, which is that there is no God but Allah, as well as Muhammad is his prophet. And generally speaking, when Muslims pray, they are to pray towards Mecca 5 times a day. They must also fast during the daylight hours of the month of Ramadan. They're also required to give money to the poor, help out people who are in need, and make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their life. Islam teaches that the Day of Judgment will involve people's good deeds and bad deeds being weighed side by side to see, okay, did the good deeds outweigh the bad deeds? Christianity has a much different concept of salvation, and it teaches that a person is saved by the gift of God, which is through accepting the death of Jesus Christ through faith in him. So therefore, you're no longer required to do a bunch of different good works to be accepted by God and be saved, but rather you're just saved through faith in Jesus. And because you're saved, you just naturally want to now do good works, because yeah, who doesn't want to help out their fellow man and just be a good person in general?
Hi there, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about Islam, which, like Christianity and Judaism, grew up on the east coast of the Mediterranean. But unlike Christianity and Judaism, it's not terribly well understood in the West. For instance, you probably know what this is and what this is. You probably don't know what that is. Google it. Mr. Green, why do you think people know so little about Islamic history? Did you just ask an interesting, non-annoying question me from the past? I think we don't know much about early Islamic history because we don't learn about it, because we're taught that our history is the story of Christianity in Europe, when in fact, our history is the story of people on the planet. So let's try to learn something today. In 200 years, Islam went from not existing to being the religious and political organizing principle of one of the largest empires in the world. And that story begins in the 7th century CE, when the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, a 40-ish guy who made his living as a caravan trader, and told him to begin reciting the word of God. Initially, this freaked Muhammad out, as, you know, it would, but then his wife and a couple other people encouraged him, and slowly he came to accept the mantle of prophet. A few things to know about the world Islam entered. First, Muhammad's society was intensely tribal. He was a member of the Quraysh tribe living in Mecca, and tribal ties were extremely important. Also at the time, the Arabian Peninsula was like this crazy religious melting pot. Like most tribal Arabs worshipped gods very similar to the Mesopotamian gods you'll remember from episode 3. And by the time of Muhammad, cult statues of many of those gods had been collected in his hometown of Mecca in this temple-like structure called the Kaaba. But Arabia was also home to monotheisms like Christianity and Judaism and even a bit of Zoroastrianism, so the message that there was only one God wouldn't have been like as surprising to Muhammad as it was, for instance, to Abraham. Also, and this will become very important, the northern part of Arabia was sandwiched between the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Sasanian Empire, and you'll remember those guys were always fighting. They were like snowboarders and skiers, or like the Westboro Baptist Church and everyone else. At its core, Islam is what we call a radical reforming religion. Just as Jesus and Moses sought to restore Abrahamic monotheism after what they perceived as straying, so too did Muhammad. Muslims believe that God sent Muhammad as the final prophet to bring people back to the one true religion, which involves the worship of and submission to a single and all-powerful God. The Quran also acknowledges Abraham and Moses and Jesus, among others, as prophets, but it's very different from the Hebrew and Christian Bibles. For one thing, it's much less narrative, but also it's the written record of the revelations Muhammad received, which means it's not written from the point of view of people. It is seen as the actual word of God. The Quran is a really broad-ranging text, but it returns again and again to a couple themes. One is strict monotheism, and the other is the importance of taking care of those less fortunate than you. The Quran says of the good person, spends his substance, however much he himself may cherish it, upon his near of kin and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarer and the beggars, and for the freeing of human beings from bondage. These revelations also radically increase the rights of women and orphans, which is one of the reasons that Muhammad's tribal leaders weren't that psyched about them. One more thing about Islam. Like Christianity and Judaism, it has a body of law. You might have heard of it. It's called Sharia. Although we tend to think of Sharia as a single set of laws that all Muslims follow, that's ridiculous. There are numerous competing ideas about Sharia, just as there are within any legal tradition. So people who embraced this worldview were called Muslims because they submitted to the will of God, and they became part of the Ummah, or community of believers. This would be a good moment for an Uma Thurman joke, but sadly, she is no longer famous. I'm sorry if you're watching this, Uma Thurman. Being part of the Ummah trumped all other ties, including tribal ties, which got Muhammad into some trouble and brings us, at last, back to history. So as Muhammad's following in Mecca grew, the Ummah aroused the suspicion of the most powerful tribe in Mecca, the Quraysh. And it didn't matter that Muhammad himself was born into the Quraysh tribe, because he wouldn't shut up about how there was only one God, which was really bad news to the Quraysh tribe, because they managed the pilgrimage trade in Mecca, and if all those gods were false, it would be a disaster economically. Although, come to think of it, in the end, the Meccan pilgrimage business turned out just fine. So the Quraysh forced Muhammad and his followers out of Mecca in 622 CE, and they headed to Yathrib, also known as Medina. This journey, also known as the Hijra, is so important that it marks year 0 in the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad severed the religion's ties to Judaism, turning the focus of prayer away from Jerusalem to Mecca. Also in Medina, the Islamic community started to look a lot more like a small empire than like a church. Like, Jesus never had a country to run, but Muhammad did almost from the beginning, and in addition to being an important prophet, he was a good general, and in 630, the Islamic community took back Mecca. They destroyed all those idols in the Kaaba, and soon Islam was as powerful a political force in the region as it was a religious one. And it's because the political and religious coexisted from the beginning that there's no separate tradition of civic and religious law like there is in Christianity and Judaism. So then when Muhammad died in 632 CE, there wasn't a religious vacuum left behind. Muhammad was the final prophet. The revelation of the Quran would continue to guide the Ummah throughout their lives. But the community did need a political leader, a caliph, and the first caliph was Abu Bakr, Muhammad's father-in-law, who was not without his opponents. Many people wanted Ali, Muhammad's son-in-law, to lead the community, and although he did become the fourth caliph, that initial disagreement, to radically oversimplify because we only have 10 minutes, began the divide between the two major sects of Islam, Sunni and Shia. And even today, Sunni Muslims believe Abu Bakr was rightly elected the first caliph, and Shia Muslims believe it should have been Ali. To Sunnis, the first 4 caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, are known as the rightly guided caliphs, and many of the conservative movements in the Islamic world today are all about trying to restore the Islamic world to those glory days, which, like most glory days, were not unambiguously glorious. Abu Bakr stabilized the community after Muhammad's death and began the process of recording the Quran in writing, and started the military campaigns against the Byzantine and Sasanian empires that within 116 years would allow the Islamic Empire to go from this to this. His successor Umar was both an uncommonly good general and a brilliant administrator, but like so many other great men, he proved terrible at avoiding assassination, which led to the Caliphate of Uthman, who standardized the Quran and continued both his predecessor's tradition of conquest and his predecessor's tradition of getting assassinated. Then Ali finally got his turn as caliph, but his ascension was very controversial and it ultimately led to a civil war, which eventually led to the emergence of Uthman's tribe, the Umayyads, as the dynasty that would rule over an ever-expanding Islamic empire for more than 100 years. It's common to hear that in these early years Islam, quote, spread by the sword, and that's partly true, unless you are, wait for it, the Mongols. Actually, as usual, the truth is more complicated. Many people, including the Mongols, but also including lots of people in Central and East Asia, embraced Islam without any military campaigns. And in fact, the Quran says that religion must not be an act of compulsion. But this much is true. The early Islamic Empire was really good at winning wars. And situated as they were between two very wealthy empires, the Byzantines and the Sasanians, there was plenty to fight for. The first of all were the Sasanians, the last non-Muslim successor to the Persian Empire. They were relatively easy pickings because they'd been fighting the Byzantines for like 300 years and they were super tired. Also, they had recently been struck by plague. Plague, man, I'm telling you, it's like the red tortoiseshell of history. But in those early days, they did pry away some valuable territory like Egypt and the Holy Land, and then eventually they got into Spain, where various Muslim dynasties would entrench themselves until being expelled in 1492. But as good as they were at making war, it's still tempting to chalk up the Arab success to, you know, the will of God. And certainly a lot of the people they conquered felt that way. Wars in this part of the world didn't just pit people against each other, they also pitted their gods against each other. So while the Islamic Empire didn't require its subjects to convert to Islam, their stunning successes certainly convinced a lot of people that this monotheism thing was legit. Once again, John Green proving super hip to the slang of today's young'uns. Also, you paid lower taxes if you converted, and just as taxes on cigarettes lead to people not wanting to smoke, taxes on worshiping your idols lead to people not wanting to worship them anymore. So in a period of time that was historically speaking both remarkably recent and remarkably short, a small group of people from an area of the world with no natural resources managed to create one of the great empires of the world and also one of its great religions. And that very fact may be why people of Western European descent remain largely ignorant about this period. Not only were the Muslims great conquerors, they spawned an explosion of trade and learning that lasted hundreds of years. They saved many of the classic texts that form the basis of the so-called Western canon while Europe was ignoring them, and they paved the way for the Renaissance. While it's important to remember that much of the world between Spain and the Indus River wasn't Arabized, most of it was so thoroughly Islamized that these days we can't think of the world we now call the Middle East without thinking of it as Islamic. Like perhaps the greatest testimony to Islam's power to organize people's lives and their communities is that in Egypt, 5 times a day, millions of people turn away from the pyramids and toward Mecca. Egypt, birthplace to one of the longest continuous cultures the world has ever known, is now the largest Arab country in the world.
In Cairo, a muezzin calls faithful Muslims to prayer. It's the same call that sounds 5 times a day, every day, in cities across the world. God is most great, the muezzin calls. I testify there is no other God but God. I testify Muhammad is the messenger of God. Come and pray. Come and flourish. God is most great. There is no God but God. In the unfolding of history, Islamic civilization has been one of humanity's grandest achievements. A worldwide power founded simply on faith. a spiritual revolution that would shape the nations of 3 continents and launch an empire. For the West, much of the history of Islam has been obscured behind a veil of fear and misunderstanding. Yet Islam's hidden history is deeply and surprisingly interwoven with Western civilization. It was Muslim scholars who reclaimed the ancient wisdom of the Greeks, while Europe languished in the Dark Ages. It was they who sowed the seeds of the Renaissance, 600 years before the birth of Leonardo da Vinci. From the way we heal the sick, to the numerals we use for counting, cultures across the globe have been shaped by Islamic civilization. But all this began with the life of a single, ordinary man, and the profound message he proclaimed would change the world forever. In only 2 centuries, Islam had extended its reach from Spain all the way to the edge of India. It took nearly a year to travel from one end of the Arab Empire to the other. At its heart was a fabled city of wealth. It was called Baghdad. The palaces of ancient Baghdad have been lost over the centuries, but in its glory, it rivaled ancient Athens or Rome. It was a magnificent architectural achievement, the pride of Islam in a new age. One visitor left this account. All the exquisite neighborhoods covered with parks, gardens, villas, and beautiful promenades are filled with bazaars and finely built mosques and baths. They stretch for miles on both sides of the glittering river. But what made this the greatest city of its time was more than just what met the eye. It was the company it kept. Scholars made Baghdad the jewel of the world.
Certainly from the 8th century on, Baghdad was the center of learning in the Islamic world, and all major innovations either came from Baghdad or quickly came to Baghdad because the best people came to Baghdad, the best thinkers, the best philosophers, the best artists.
They came in search of answers to pragmatic questions. The empire's meteoric growth had left its new leaders overwhelmed. They had staggering engineering and logistical problems to contend with. Solving them would take the greatest minds of the day.
Under the new empire now, you are responsible for public hygiene, you are responsible for the marketplace, you are responsible for goods being sold in the marketplace. All of those require some basic elementary sciences. This new civilization, having a need for science, really stems from the need to run that empire.
The best minds rose to the call. The finest were welcomed at a center of scholarship, Baghdad's renowned House of Wisdom.
It was a magnet for scholars and intellectuals who came and worked in the academies. There were public libraries associated with the palace, and scholars came from all over the empire. And there were scholars from Iran, there were scholars from Byzantium who came. Some were Christians, some were Muslims, some were Jews. And all of these different sort of threads of human knowledge came together in the city of Baghdad.
So the net effect of this is that you've got human individuals from radically different cultural traditions being thrown into the same crucible.
The challenge that greeted these scholars was daunting. The great works of the ancients had to be transformed into a wholly new body of knowledge. Competition for jobs developed within a new intellectual elite.
And from there on, every single scientist is competing for that job. They were competing among themselves almost just in the same way that modern bureaucrats and modern academicians will fight among themselves.
Scholars were dispatched across the empire to locate as many ancient texts as possible. The first international scientific venture in history. Unlike their Christian counterparts, Muslim thinkers saw no insurmountable contradiction between their faith and the laws governing the natural world. So they embraced Aristotle and Plato, writers the Christian church considered blasphemous.
So this is the time when we begin to see scientists, bureaucrats, what have you, going and seeking from whatever civilization that had any sciences before, be it the Greek, be it the Indian, being the Persian, and so on.
From the Hindus came mathematical concepts that guide us today. It was the scholars of the House of Wisdom who developed the system of Arabic numerals, still in use. It is they who translated and transformed the writings of the Greeks and made a gift of them to the modern Western world. The Renaissance had its beginnings in Baghdad.
They managed to assimilate quite a lot of the rich legacy of the Hellenistic world, translated into Arabic initially, which was then made available to all other participants in the new Islamic civilization. Arabic emerges as the language of learning throughout the region. This is a very significant development in human intellectual history.
Having amassed the knowledge, the Muslims now began to challenge it. This was perhaps their most important contribution. The scientific process was born.
They wanted to know why a very intelligent Greek scientist, whose text they were just admiring and they were verifying it, why would he make a mistake in the first place? So they began to dig, was it because he didn't have the right instruments, or is it because he didn't have the right methodology to use the instruments for the verifications of observation? It is this spirit. You see, the spirit of questioning, the spirit of saying that we have to build science constantly on a systematic, consistent basis where we make a physical proposition of how the universe ought to be run, and the mathematical representation of that physical universe ought to match. Now you begin to have what I call the birth of the new Islamic science.
Algebra and trigonometry, engineering and astronomy, countless disciplines integral to our lives today trace their roots to Islamic scientists. More surprising, perhaps, were their innovations in medicine. At a time when Europeans were praying to the bones of their saints to cure their illnesses, Muslim physicians developed an innovative theory that disease was transmitted through tiny airborne organisms, the precursor to the study of germs. They determined that sick patients should be quarantined and then treated. This is the basis of the institution most fundamental to medicine today, the hospital. Funded mainly through religious endowments, Muslim hospitals had separate wards for patients suffering from different kinds of disease. Even mental illness was treated. Their studies of anatomy were so sophisticated that they remained in use by Muslim and European physicians for 600 years. Muslim scientists were especially intrigued by light, lenses, and the physiology of the human eye. The father of optics was a Muslim named Ibn al-Haytham. His work with lenses eventually led to the invention of the modern camera. He produced the first treatise that ventured to explain how the eye actually sees. A 1,000 years before the West dared to take up the practice, Muslim doctors were removing cataracts surgically, clearing them from the eye with a hollow needle. But for all this knowledge to transform and illuminate an empire, it had to be copied and shared across 100 different cities in the Islamic world. For this, there was a new invention, one that is still fundamental to learning and knowledge today: paper.
Around the year 700, 750, when Muslim armies reached Central Asia, they encountered paper for the first time. And very quickly, the Muslim bureaucracy started using paper. You find that, within 50 years, it's in Syria, and then a few years after that, it's in Egypt, and then it's in North Africa, and then it's in Sicily, and then it's in Spain. And that's where Europe learned to make paper from. They learned to make it from the Arabs.
We begin to have people with family names like papermaker. So in other words, not only that paper was available, it must have become a very, very widespread industry. And hence, the acquisition of books must have also become very easy.
With the wide use of books and paper, hundreds of scribes, some of whom were women, were kept busy transcribing the translations and new writings of the Baghdad scholars.
All of this knowledge that's being acquired from the Greeks and from the Indians and from Central Asia and stuff is all being written down in books on paper. And that these books are being copied and recopied and sent around. We know, for example, that there was a street of booksellers with more than 100 shops, each one with paper and books for sale. And this is a time when, in Europe, a monastery would be lucky if it had 5 or 10 books.
While the monks of the West were hoarding their wisdom on scraps of expensive parchment, paper enabled Islamic civilization to spread its newfound knowledge far and wide, creating a single community linking 3 continents.
So the chief distinction, therefore, of Islamic civilization, in addition to the fact that it made new leaps of originality, new transformations in traditions of learning and everything else possible, is the fact that it enabled human beings to consider the possibility of thinking about the globe as a single unit, humanity.
In all the broad empire, there was one place the Christian world could experience the lifestyle Muslims now took for granted: southern Spain. Here, on the European continent itself, Islamic culture would begin to have an effect on the European civilization around it. 1,000 years ago, the Spanish city of Cordoba was a center of learning and culture that rivaled Baghdad. Today, Cordoba's narrow lanes hearken to its medieval past. During the Dark Ages, this was the most prosperous and sophisticated metropolis on the continent. It had streetlights and paved roads, libraries, hospitals and palaces. This was a city of light, a Muslim city.
The city of Cordoba in the 9th and 10th centuries was one of the biggest and most exciting in Europe. We have descriptions of it by people coming and saying, all these flowers everywhere, this open streets, this wonderful light coming down. Northern cities were dark. Cordova had running water. People lived in big houses. In contrast, in Paris, people lived in shacks by the side of the river.
The glory of medieval Cordoba is here, in what is now the great Roman Catholic Cathedral in the middle of town. But the Cordoba Cathedral of today began its life as a mosque, one of the grandest of the Islamic Empire.
The Great Mosque in Cordova was simply the biggest mosque in the biggest city in southern Europe.
When you climb up into the church tower, which used to be a minaret, you look out over this expanse of roof, it's quite amazing to see this cathedral, complete with flying buttresses, popping up out of the middle of this massive mosque.
Many people came to visit it to view the wonders of the mosque, which had rib vaulting, the kind of vaulting which is like this, and which 100 years later, by a mere coincidence you might think, but not at all a coincidence, appears in the Gothic cathedrals of Northern Europe, in Lincoln Cathedral, in Chartres Cathedral in France. Where does that come from? Obviously influenced by the great Mosque of Cordoba in the south of Spain.